surrounding the changes of the labour laws in Decree 152 and the recent resolution of 105 relevant to COVID-19 relief. We'll also discuss entry approvals and navigating the changes, the effects, and also the effects on businesses, which depend on sizable expatriate workforces. There are, of course, many variables when discussing labour laws and work permits, etc., as everyone's circumstances differ. So this will be an informative but general discussion followed by Q&A. Please also, during this time, you can pose questions to the panel by using the Q&A function in the on your window at the bottom of the window. Thanks. After the event, we'll follow up by posting resources for you to make further inquiries and decisions, and some, if necessary, applications, as some needs of certain people will be greater than others. This morning, we're honoured to present our speakers to engage in an open discussion on the practicalities of entering and staying in Vietnam to work. I'd like to present Colin Blackwell, Chair of the VBF Human Resources Working Group. Colin is the Chair of the VBF HR Group, representing Chambers of Commerce to Vietnam Government and Labour Laws. He runs a Swiss fintech company and Vietnamese social enterprise. He's also the judge of many business competitions and an international speaker on the future of work. Welcome, Colin. We also present Andrea Godfrey. Andrea is a partner, tax and corporate services consultant in global mobility services with KPMG Vietnam. Andrea leads KPMG's global mobility services practice in Vietnam, which specialises, among other things, on immigration and personal income tax. Andrea also sits on the board of BritCham. She is a very experienced tax professional, having worked in both practice and industry for over 35 years. She is a frequent speaker on immigration and personal income tax. Welcome, Andrea. I'd also like to present Annie Gale. Annie Gale is Director of Human Resources for RMIT in Vietnam. Annie has been in post as Director of Human Resources for Vietnam since mid-2019. Prior to that, Annie was employed as the Regional Human Resources Director, Southeast Asia, with Nord Anglia Education, based in Ho Chi Minh City. Before moving to Vietnam, Annie spent 6.5 years as Head of Human Resources with the International Baccalaureate in the UK. Welcome, Annie. So I'd like to invite, at this stage, each of the speakers to make an opening comment on the current situation in Vietnam, especially from their perspective. So I'd like to start with Colin. Thank you, Colin.
Certainly, thank you. So this issue of work permits has been a very long drawn issue. I personally have been working on this in the VBF for several years now. And I remember even being involved in this when I was first in Vietnam in the mid-1990s. In fact, I was one of the first people in Vietnam to get a work permit. But the VBF, just to introduce what that is first. So it's all of the chambers of commerce together. And it's chaired by the Ministry of Planning and Investment and the World Bank IFC. So we're meant to be like one voice advocating for the private sector to the government. It's including VCCI as well. So a number of other countries have way more expats in Vietnam than, let's say, the British or the Australians. So, for example, the Koreans have, I think it's about 200,000 plus people in Vietnam. So you can imagine they're very motivated to see this issue resolved. The same with the Japanese and others. So this issue, it's a matter of kind of definitions. So there, you'll hear later about, for example, you know, does a degree have to match exactly the job that the person will do? And this has been negotiated, yes, off and on for years and years. And the Decree 152 actually made some things a lot simpler. So, for example, someone who is married to a Vietnamese now gets a work permit exemption, although the mechanism isn't entirely clear. There was a great worry that, for example, people would only be able to stay for 4 years because it was talking about you can only extend, you can do a 2-year and then extend once. But that's now been clarified that, of course, you can just put in a new application and continue straight on. And there was the recent decision, or the resolution 105. So the government has been looking now to change gears a little bit towards the future recovery from COVID. So of course, during COVID, it's incredibly difficult to really get the attention of government because they're so busy. You know, obviously you can imagine just fighting the crisis at the moment, looking after, I suppose, more important things than this particular issue. But there is a concerted effort by the government now to look to the future and how to make Vietnam again very attractive for foreign investment, and how to get those numbers back up. So the resolution 105 was from the Prime Minister, specifically in this regard. It covered any number of topics, but very specifically, it did cover this work permit topic. And as the VBF, we've put in recommendations, a letter that was signed individually by the chairman of each of the chambers of commerce. And we put this into the government. This resulted in a meeting between the Minister of Planning and Investment, who was supporting us, the Deputy Prime Minister, who he reports to, and the Minister of Labour. So it definitely came on the agenda. It was the Ministry of Planning and Investment who was then responsible for drafting and implementing the recovery plan for the private sector from COVID. And they very specifically put in the recommendations that the suggestions of the foreign business community around work permits were valid, and that the Ministry of Labour should consider them carefully. And that then materialised into the Prime Minister's direct resolution, which pinpointed very specific areas of the law, which we had been concerned about. So there are a few good wins that came out of this, specifically. Number one, the university degree doesn't exactly have to match the job, which was a sticking point before. Number two, if you get a work permit in one province, you're allowed to work in another province. And there was an issue very specific to the Chinese around notarizing passports, which is a hassle for the rest of us, but it was particularly difficult there. And that's been resolved as well. So what we're doing as our next step is to contact through the Ministry of Planning and Investment and the VBF Secretariat, the Office of the Government, and ask the Ministry of Labour to issue now detailed instructions to the Departments of Labour on how to implement Resolution 105. Because what I'm sure you'll be hearing from Andrea as well, it's the difficulty is because you make the application with the Department of Labour, and they're often unclear themselves about what the regulation should be. So you've got a lot of variation from province to province, unfortunately. And at this time, when there's very strict entry restrictions, they tend to err on the side of caution. So it's a little bit more strict. So in looking at immediate solutions, so if companies are now worried about urgent requests for getting people in, or people are worried about what will happen in the next couple of months, we can't give easy solutions at the moment. But what we can say is that we're working hard to get the solutions in place for when the government is much more receptive to them. When the immediate crisis is over and they're looking to rebuild again, they'll be basically very receptive, in my hope, and that this really will get resolved. But for now, I know it's difficult, but we are working on it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Colin. Andrea, would you have an opening comment for us, please?
Yeah, sure. As maybe I'll go into a little bit more detail. As so, my team, part of my team, looks after immigration more broadly. It looks after work permits, visas, and also entry approval. So the team has been extremely busy, and it's over the last 12 months plus. And the entry approval in particular was very complicated, and it's changing rapidly each time. And with the issue of Decree 152, obviously the issue of the ability to get work permits became more difficult. So as Colin referred to, the particular issues on work permits were the requirement to have a relevant degree, a degree relevant to your job position in Vietnam, and also your work experience that also needed to be certified. There was also a requirement for the work experience to be overseas. So they didn't take into account any work that you had undertaken in Vietnam. And those two particular issues Colin's referred to the issue of the renewal only once, which has already been resolved. What Resolution 105 did was, as Colin's already mentioned, it took away the requirement for the degree to be relevant to the position completely. But it also said that you could use the work permit that you've had in the past in Vietnam as evidence of your experience to undertake the role in Vietnam going forward, which is a really good thing, particularly for those who have been here, as Colin has, for a number of years. So that's been incredibly useful. And as Colin said as well, they've taken away the need to notarise the passport, which also makes sense because logically, if you want to apply for the work permit before you enter Vietnam, you wouldn't be able to notarise the passport till you got here. So that's also logically makes sense. As Colin said, we need guidance from Melissa to all the different departments to actually put this in place. What Resolution 105 didn't do was effectively give any indication of making it easier to come into the country. So it still requires, effectively, if you're an expert, it still requires for you to have evidence that you can fill that position, being a degree and evidence of experience to come into the country, and that still requires to be notarized and legalized. And that's required even if you're coming in for a short term and you don't need a work permit, effectively. You're just coming in on a short-term visa. So that particular issue wasn't addressed. So it would be, what Resolution 105 did say was they would like all the authorities to try and make it quicker and easier to come in, but didn't really specify how to do that. So that's something that I guess we would welcome a little bit more guidance on. And it didn't call, as I said, it didn't call for simplified entry approval procedures. It's left the entry approval procedures as they are, which are quite complicated and different for each jurisdiction or each authority. So effectively, what I'm saying is entry approval is still difficult. Getting a work permit is definitely been, the flexibility is back again to get the work permit, which is very, very welcome. But still, for people coming into the country, they still are required to actually do quite a lot before they get in, even if they can get the work permit in due course.
Excellent, thanks, Andrea. So that what you've just mentioned leads into asking Annie for an overview of the current situation as a big employer, RMIT being a big employer, both in the north and the south, of expatriate staff. So do you have an opening comment? Thanks, Annie.
Sure, yeah, thank you. And I guess leading on from what Andrea's just said in terms of entry requirements, yes, there is a lot of documentation that's required before people come to Vietnam, but something that did change relatively recently is that our incoming colleagues are not able to actually submit the application for a work permit until they arrive, and currently with COVID restrictions they need to wait until they've completed the compulsory quarantine period, which for vaccinated people has now thankfully reduced to 7 days. So currently we're not able to apply for entry permits at all for Ho Chi Minh City. So we've needed to redo the paperwork and bring our new members of staff in through Hanoi. But we need to then wait for them to complete quarantine before we can submit an application for a work permit. And that brings, a couple of complications with it. Firstly, those individuals have given up their jobs potentially in the country that they're coming from, so they're not able to earn. Clearly they can't be working from a quarantine hotel in Vietnam without having the legal right to work here, so they're coming without a work permit, completing quarantine with no income, and then there is no guarantee that the work permit will be issued, even with the significant amount of due diligence that we do before people arrive. We wouldn't bring somebody unless we were really very confident that that work permit would be issued. And we haven't, fortunately, been in a situation where we've needed to say to somebody, we're terribly sorry, but despite everybody's best efforts, we're just not able to do that, and have to send them home again. However, there have been a couple of instances, and hopefully this will be resolved now with the new resolution, whereby the authorities have received the documentation for the work permit application and then queried the relevance of the qualification or the relevance of that person's work experience, which has caused a delay to that person being able to start work. And clearly that's a very stressful period of time for the incoming member of staff. It could be kind of 6 to 8 weeks before we have a positive result from that work permit application. And also as an employer, as an organisation, it causes delays for us in terms of, we have, as a university, we have classes that person has been brought over to teach, and work that that is waiting for them. So it causes a knock-on effect for the other people who are working for us also. So just coming into the country and having people being able to start work quickly is it's not as easy as once it was. I think in terms of some of the other things that we're dealing with, we have a large English school at RMIT, and many of our English teacher colleagues have been in Vietnam for a considerable period of time. And we've been in a great position to be able to offer them career development and to kind of climb the ladder. So they might have come to Vietnam maybe 10, 15 years ago with the intention of being an English teacher, and settled, made their life here, and climbed the ladder to managerial positions. Now, for those who've been here and have perhaps been in a managerial position for some time, we can now apply for a work permit for them for their existing position, because the requirement for the 3 years experience to be overseas has now been removed. But for people who we might want to promote from being an English teacher into a managerial position, that's still very difficult, because we've seen the potential and they meet the criteria that we're looking for in terms of a department head or a managerial post. But because that person hasn't done that job yet anywhere, it's very challenging to get a work permit for them. So that's again one of the obstacles that we're looking at from an employer's perspective. And again, it's easy to talk about administrative burdens and challenges for us as employers and the frustrations that it gives us in terms of running our business. But I think also, particularly in a time when COVID is rampant across the world, and we haven't been able to leave Vietnam to go and travel and see family for upwards of 18 months, the impact on those people who have come to Vietnam to work and make a contribution to our organisation, but also to the country in terms of educating their children. The stress that some of those people are feeling really is significant. So from an HR point of view, as an employer, that's an added aspect to the challenges that the work permit situation has brought. I think just in terms of what Colin mentioned, expats who are married to Vietnamese citizens, not requiring a work permit any longer, sounded like terrific news when it was released. But again, we've come against some challenges when the Vietnamese spouse isn't registered as a permanent resident of Ho Chi Minh City or Hanoi. They've gone back to perhaps remote provinces in order to process the paperwork, and there's not the understanding with the authorities in those areas to be able to support the process. So we have actually ended up applying for work permits for some of those colleagues anyway, simply because that was the easiest solution for us to do. So I think in a nutshell, it's a complex area to navigate. There is the amount of paperwork required both for colleagues joining us as a new member of staff, and also for people who have already been with us for a period of time and we want to be able to maintain their employment, is also complicated and challenging. So I'll stop there and pass back to you, Simon. But yes, it's there's a lot to talk about. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Annie. Just for everybody who's on the call this morning, we're just going to do a couple of polls as we go through the webinar. So just one poll there that you might see on your screen, just asking whether or not you're experiencing any issues at this time. So if you'd like to be a part of the poll, you can just register your answer there as well. So just a question that I have to the panel, it's probably more around policy, is that you know, historically in the time that I've been here, there have been different opportunities that there's been different times that the government have moved to change the labour laws, and obviously those being eligible to work in Vietnam. And here we are with in 2020, 2021 with Decree 152. Was there actually an outcome that the government was looking for so far as the labour landscape goes?
Yeah, I mean, there was the recent, within recent couple of years, was the upgrade of the entire labour code of Vietnam. So that was a major undertaking, which was several years in the planning. It actually turned out to be a very good document in the end. So I remember some of the major issues were, for example, overtime, and yeah, various other things like dispute resolution in factories, and some quite difficult issues to focus on. But it was about 3 years ago, I was actually, there was the National Assembly kind of committee on voting on that particular law change. And I went with the Ministry of Labour and was actually proposing that the foreign business community supported their position, which had been very diligently put together with the use of you know, international conventions. I mean, there's a lot of effort gone into it. And actually now Vietnam has an incredibly modern labour code. It's got many, many good things in it, better than many countries have been sitting on labour codes for many years. So it's a work in progress. And one of the initial things that was proposed in 152, for example, was that foreign companies would have to go through a government agency to hire Vietnamese staff. Now, it sounded quite worrying when we first heard that, but actually it was a data collection issue. So when we actually addressed how they can collect data for government statistics, they didn't actually need to do that. So the government is actually very open to listening to the private sector, the foreign investor sector in particular. And it's a very thorough process with the government. So things won't happen overnight, but they do happen very effectively. So we just have to keep at it and, you know, really explain our position. You know, we give examples of how other countries in this region handle the same issue, other examples of, you know, how this impacts our business, and particularly solutions. So if we can draft the correct wording, or what we think would be best wording into the legislation, they do run the drafts past us, and very often our wording does end up in there. And the letter we'd sent to everybody about the work permits, the resolution 105 was actually echoing a lot of those exact same points. So they do listen. It is actually quite inclusive and a good mechanism. So it needs a little bit of patience, I know, but we do get there in the end.
So with that in mind, do you see that as we work towards a perfect system or a perfect set of laws and rules, is that just an ongoing process? It's something that we'll eventually get to? I guess, you know, now that we're overlaid with COVID-19 and travel restrictions, and obviously people not at work, this could take some time. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's it will be a never-ending topic, I think. But what I do suspect is late this year, early next year, when there is a big drive, I suspect, from the government about attracting in foreign investment and meeting economic targets, that'll be the ideal time to really sort of ask them to consider our recommendations.
So Andrew, I'm just curious whether or not in your role you've had an increase in inquiries, I'd imagine, from your clients, or have you been dealing with people that you might not have, been managing in the past?
So it's a mixture, Simon. It's a mixture. So what we've had is a lot of inquiry. We started doing the entry permits very early on. So as soon as they reopened the border last May, when they closed it and then they reopened it again with the restrictions, with all the entry approvals, we started doing that straight away. And so we've built up a variety of different clients. So we sometimes get them through our global network, through KPMG's global network, or we get local referrals or people who know that we can do it and they will come to us. So it's all sorts of different companies. We've got companies trying to bring in hundreds of expats to actually do very technical work in infrastructure projects. And that's been very challenging in itself. We've got people who want to bring in or change positions, new CEOs coming in, new commercial directors coming in, switching in and out. We've got people who want to go away, as Annie referred to, wanted to go see family over the summer. So they want to go out and come back in again, and how do they do that? They also want people who actually honestly would rather go and spend the current time in the UK, Europe or America, where it's a little bit more comfortable than it is currently here in Vietnam. So we've got a lot of different, if you like, requests for different reasons. And the chat, as I said, I think, Colin, you said, on the introduction of 152, that was drafted or crafted without COVID. So that was drafted as a resolution, or sorry, as a decree, without thinking about the impact of COVID. So when that came in and we had COVID at the same time, it felt like a sledgehammer, because you had COVID and then with some of the requirements in Decree 152, some of them, as Colin said, it was eased. Some of the requirements just felt like a sledgehammer coming in at the wrong time. So I think that the government have been great in actually listening to the chambers and the VBF in effectively relaxing some of those issues that were causing concern, particularly with respect to work permits. So yes, so from a KPMG perspective, we get queries, lots of different queries. I think, as Colin said, they hopefully by the beginning of next year, maybe after TET, it will be certainly entry approval. Hopefully we'll start to ease up and we'll see an influx of foreign workers coming in. But I think until that stage, there'll still be a requirement to manage who you're getting into the country, and be really careful, as Annie has referred to, managing who you need to get in and doing it in advance, and to make sure that they can get in as well and that they qualify to come into the country. Just one thing to pick up as well. With people, with the difficulty of entry and people going in and out, companies and indeed individuals also need to look at their compliance obligations where they're going to be sitting. So it's remote working. If you're working remotely, you might trigger compliance obligations in the country in which you're sitting, both for yourself and the country, and the company. So if you're going in and out, if you've gone overseas for 3, 4, 5 months over the last year, what impact does that have from a compliance perspective? And if you've got somebody waiting to come in, but they've started their role, what does that mean from a compliance perspective? So that's also something that companies and individuals need to keep a little bit of an eye on as well.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I guess that the other question I had was, as a panel, do you see any changes in the laws potentially affecting investment in the country? Or maybe that's quite a big question, but we were considering talking about the meaning of life very early on in this discussion anyway. But the sort of like, if some of these companies, new investors are looking at inserting people into the country at any time now, and they may have to wait up to 6 months, do you think they might have some effect on their investment schedule into Vietnam?
Yeah, this has already been the case, actually. So on some of the very key high technology transfers that are very high profile, let's say, manufacturing coming out of China into Vietnam for some very household name companies, they've struggled to get people in, which has, difficult situation already, it's actually slowed down some investments and deployment of capital. So that's already happened. But that these are, you know, that we have to do obviously confidentially, but raise those particular cases where technology transfer couldn't happen, because certainly under the old rules where your degree had to exactly match, it was just impossible. So for example, I do a lot of work in artificial intelligence. There aren't degrees in that. So, you know, for the kind of things I'm looking for now, if you needed a degree in it plus 3 years experience in it, that's just straight impossible. You wouldn't be able to do it. So obviously that's a matter of modernization as well, which is a larger topic.
I can see Annie nodding to your comments as well, Colin. So I think from our discussion the other day, there was some experience with this. Is that right, Annie?
Yeah, so with artificial intelligence is a really great example, actually. So if we're wanting to launch degrees and higher education courses to teach things exactly like that, we are asking for academics to have a qualification which, yes, will match artificial intelligence, and then have, so they would need a master's degree actually if they were working at a university level, a master's degree in artificial intelligence, and then 3 years working experience in that field. And yeah, that's just not possible. So it restricts the offerings that we're able to give as a university in terms of the courses that we can run, simply because we're not able to recruit the staff who can. We know that they exist, but they can't demonstrate, you know, meet the requirements for the work permit. So no, absolutely agree there.
Yeah.
But RMIT does have a very good master's in artificial intelligence in the Melbourne campus. And I've just hired a lovely young Vietnamese guy who's studying over there at the moment, who's doing his master's in AI. So it's possible, but not in Vietnam.
Well, I've got you, Annie. There's a question from Brad Miller. It says, I was told in the past that 5 years of English teaching experience in Vietnam was regarded as equal to holding a university degree. Is this true?
Not as far as I'm aware. That's a new one to me. It's not something that I have heard, unfortunately.
Interesting.
Sorry, Brad.
So I guess leading on, there's always been discussion around changes to labour law, trying to target particular people. Now, I think I think people generalise when they say changes to labour law is targeted at people who really don't have the right to work in Vietnam. Those people who may be on short-term visas, that when they come here, they fall in love with the place or a person or the situation they're in, and they start teaching English and decide to stay. Then basically the school that they work with extends their visas to the point where some of these people have probably been here for quite a few years. Do you think that there's any truth in that? Is there any part of the law that actually focuses directly on this, as there seem to be quite a large number of people that would be in this situation?
Hi, Simon. I think what we have to be aware of, though, is that the implementation of Vietnam's immigration law was pretty flexible in the past, let's call it that. So you were able to do things that weren't necessarily within the written law. And what happened was, at the same time as they issued Decree 152 and COVID happened, is they started tightening that as well. So again, it felt like everything happened at once. So in theory, you can't keep getting a tourist visa renewed for the number of years that people were doing it. It was actually not within the law. And they started to say, we're not going to do it anymore. And that felt a bit like, again, well, everyone's going, is this true? Why are they doing this? But at the end of the day, a lot of people, no disrespect to a lot of people, they weren't in Vietnam legally within the law. So as I said, what happened was a combination of Decree 152 coming in, COVID coming in, and the immigration authorities all tightening up at the same time. So it felt like a lot of negativity towards the foreign people and foreign community here.
I think but also be fair to say that the direction of the policy and the laws in Vietnam are probably aligning with a lot of other countries. Advanced countries. I think there was the point of a lot of European countries' laws on labour laws and also on immigration are something that basically Vietnam is aspiring to be or have as well. Would that be a fair comment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a natural progression. I mean, Vietnam is now a middle-income country, and you'd expect that the immigration practices will, tighten up and become more selective, which is actually a good thing. But another thing to just remember is a lot of the law is written with a different audience in mind to, let's say, the Western investors. So what their concerns would be is, for example, from some neighboring countries, that people would bring over, thousands of people to staff a factory rather than hiring Vietnamese nationals. So a lot of it comes from that perspective, which is very different from the kinds of businesses we're in. But the law has to cut across all of that and address everything. So some of the restrictions that are put in for things that nothing to do with us do affect us, but it's not necessarily intentional. It's not any bad will on their part, and that's why we have to raise our voice to say, actually, when you were trying to do this, there's an impact on this other issue as well, and can you please give us some special consideration around that?
Do you think, with that in mind, Colin, do you think that the Vietnam government have been quite lenient when it comes to, say, foreigners?
Well, I think there was more flexibility, as Andrea said, in the past, and that wasn't always correct, what was happening in practice. So I think they'll still be very welcoming for the right people. And of course, they highly value foreign investment and foreign technology transfer, but it's going to be much more effective and efficient going forward. And of course, that's going to mean often a bit more application process and things like that. But I think we do have to bear with them it's a natural progression that many countries go through. And yes, it's a little bit difficult in the short term, but it will settle down, I think, in the medium term.
Yeah, definitely, because I just think that one of the comments that Annie made earlier was that now there's a lot of, obviously there's a lot of people under a great deal of emotional pressure. And they could be, look, I'd imagine that there would be the thought that they may be perhaps being victimised. Yeah, look, I think that as we move towards a more sophisticated labour law and also immigration policy, that, we will see the landscape of people in these roles changing. I do see that there are some questions in the Q&A. Kevin Poynton asks, are work permits transferable between employers within the validity period?
So no, you have to get a new work permit for each employer that you have. If you're looking for 2 employers, you have to have 2 work permits. So if you're transferring between one employer and another, you have to go through an application process again. If you have had a work permit issued under Decree 152 and then moved to another company in the same position, it's actually relatively straightforward. If you're going for a completely different role, obviously you've got the issues that you've got to go through the whole process again.
Very good. So there's Winnie Lamb also has a question. While having a work permit is one thing right now, the more pressing question is how to get back into the country if you're currently overseas. The work permit doesn't automatically allow you back in right now. And any update on that?
So I think this is particularly the case in Ho Chi Minh City. So in Hanoi, if you're coming into Hanoi, it's relatively straightforward. If you've got a current work permit and you do an application, they are accepting entry for people coming into Hanoi. The issue in Ho Chi Minh City, I think, is well, there's a number of issues. One, the COVID situation is much more complicated. DeLissa have got a lot of people apparently in quarantine, so there's a lack of labour force in DeLissa. So they are only addressing entry approval for specific cases. They're talking about teachers and medical, I think, and a couple of other things. So if you're coming into an area which has currently got a COVID situation, then it's going to be difficult to get them to focus on giving you entry approval.
Great, thanks, Andrea.
Agreed.
Great. So I think also at this time, while we see changes in the laws, for those people in Vietnam who are here at this time, it's very one of the most pressing issues that they have is probably understanding whether or not they can get access to, I guess, people to do police checks, obviously extend visas, temporary work permits, etc. And I think that from what I understand is that a lot of the government departments have slowed down considerably, and that means that getting access to police checks and also notarization of documents, from my knowledge in Ho Chi Minh City, is very difficult. And obviously there's another layer on that of Decree 16, meaning that you stay where you are as well. Do you see any respite in the short term for a lot of people who are in this situation and probably overstayed some of their documentation?
Sorry, I think so. For people who've overstayed the documentation, there is, I think, from a tourist visa perspective, it's going on a month-by-month basis, my understanding. So people are getting nervous, and it doesn't do anybody's, if you like, as Annie's referred to, mental health any good. So they're going right to the edge and then saying, "Oh, you can stay another month." So
yeah, I've noticed that too. Yeah.
Yeah. It also depends on the authority where you are. Some authorities are now will do that and issue you a visa for it. Others are now saying you come to a point you can get a flight out of Vietnam now, particularly going into Europe and the UK and America. It's therefore you have to go. We'll extend it for whatever period of time. Then you have to go.
So from I know from the Australian government's point of view, there is assistance. Obviously, there's people who are here and obviously want to leave, and the embassy and both the consulate are giving assistance to navigate people's exit from the country, and they probably fall outside of what we've been discussing with Decree 152 and also Resolution 105. So is there, from the British government's or the British consulate and embassy in Vietnam, are they offering the same support and services as well?
It's actually quite easy to get to the UK. so if people want to go, it's relatively straightforward. I think there's a flight to Singapore pretty much twice a day, and then you jump on a flight from Singapore to the UK as an example. So we haven't got the same issues in the UK as you have in Australia. It's relatively straightforward. If you want to go back, you can go back very easily.
Well, that's comforting. I couldn't say it's that easy for Australians, that's for sure at this time. You're probably aware of that as well. I had a question from Sarah Gillespie. Is there any official guidance stating that work experience within Vietnam is now recognised? Or the previous work permit can be used as proof of experience? I think you might have been talking about that before, Andrea.
Yeah, I mean, so Resolution 105 does say that the previous work permit can now be used to justify past experience in that particular role. It's, as Annie said, it's then the interpretation of what that means when you get promoted. So if the role that you've done in Vietnam is a specific one and then you move on to a different one, will that then be relevant? So it's a matter of working through what that means with the authorities as well. But if you're just continuing to do the same role and you're effectively in the same role and you're applying for a new work permit under Decree 152, Resolution 105 indicates that the work permit that you've had for that role in the past should satisfy that certificate of that experience requirement.
Excellent. Thank you. Kevin Poynton has been asking a couple of questions, but he asks, does a temporary residence card automatically expire when an employee leaves the sponsor organisation? And to the best of my knowledge, is that is the case.
I think so, yeah.
I think you have to return the temporary residence card when the work permit is cancelled. So on leaving an employer, we are required to cancel the work permit and send it, I think, back to Dolisa. And at that time, the TRC, which is the partner document to the work permit, is also cancelled, is my understanding.
Yeah, that's correct. In practice, in the past, some organisations have let individuals keep hold of their TRC. It's not what you're legally supposed to do until they've managed to sort themselves out, or either move to another company and get another visa, or leave the country. I think there's if you hand your TRC and there is if you like a departure visa, you can get a bridging visa for a period of, I think it's about 10 to 15 days.
I should have taken Andrew's advice with the spacebar. So with for an overall, say, I'm just trying to think of, there's so many questions coming through, and some of them are very long, and it's a bit difficult to actually read them and interpret. But for me, I'm just wondering, how do you see the landscape, within the next 12 months for people wanting to enter and stay in Vietnam? Do you think the process will be more streamlined? Will it be more online? Will there be any major changes to, say, a nationally recognised system? Is that a part of the drive at the moment as well?
I think this will depend on the local conditions of the COVID restrictions, really. I'm, for example, in Vung Tau province at the moment, and it's almost impossible to move over the border. So if it's difficult to move between provinces in Vietnam, you can imagine why then it's difficult to move internationally into Vietnam. So it's quite understandable, and that's going to vary province to province. And it's impossible to look into a crystal ball and work out what's going to happen with the COVID numbers. So there's certainly the intention from the government to open up as soon as it's safe to do so. But that's anyone's guess as to what the virus is going to do. So it's a bit of a difficult one, that.
Sure. With the and how do you see that applying to, say, RMIT, Annie, in the future? I mean, obviously, I'd imagine that with a business which is employing a large number of expatriates, what sort of lead time do you need on decisions of bringing people into the country and those who are exiting as well? And do you think that would probably, fall in line with perhaps mid-year or later next year? I know it's a bit of crystal ball gazing.
It is a little bit, yeah. So at the moment, it's taking us about 9 months to get new hires into the country, which, from a planning perspective, is a real challenge. People's entry permit requests being declined at the very last minute. So we'll be all set up for somebody and have a tentative arrival date, which, as I said, then leads into the work permit process once they've completed quarantine. But with very short notice, receiving information that the entry permit is declined. So will that change in the coming 6 to 12 months? Well, I sincerely hope so, because we're hoping to recruit a large number more staff for next year. The university is growing quite rapidly, and to accompany that, we need to make sure that we can be appropriately staffed. So, but yeah, at the moment, it's taking us about 9 months to bring people to Vietnam, which is a long time.
So with that in mind, that's probably as much the fault of the issue of COVID-19 as well as the changes of law. But do you see that a lot of people who've been made offers are sitting on those offers and then deciding that they might go somewhere else in the region, which is probably easier to access?
There have been a couple of people who have, particularly recently, been halfway through the process and said, you know what, I think I'm going to stay where I am, or I think I'm going to, go somewhere else. Although I'm not sure that there is that, golden unicorn destination right now. I think there are going to be challenges wherever you decide to go. But we've also seen, in terms of the recruitment market, people being less willing to move roles right now because of the uncertainty that COVID, rather than the work permit process, really has introduced to life globally. But the two together is a bit of a perfect storm, really.
Totally agree. It's just, I have another question from the audience. It's, is it okay to keep extending business visa with my company if I could not get a work permit? I guess that's the only thing you can do, isn't it?
So again, in practice, people used to do that in the past. So again, Decree 152 changed slightly what the exemption period was. So the exemption period used to be effectively a period of up to 90 days. Now they say you can come in for up to 30 days, up to 30 days at a time, 3 times a year. So up to 90 days in total, but not in parallel. This is an exemption qualification. So that means, in theory, that you shouldn't be able to keep renewing your DN visa, your business visa, legally within the terms of the law. In practice, it's the authorities are still allowing that to happen, particularly where they see that people are going through a process of trying to get a work permit. But under the law, strictly interpretation of the law, then no, you're not allowed to keep renewing your DN visa without getting a work permit if you're going to be here for longer than 30 days. That's what the law says.
Well, I think that answers.
I think in practice, so the practice you might see changing over time, whereas in the past, people used to be able to renew their DN business visa indefinitely. So now it's becoming more challenging to do that, and there'll be much more pushback from the immigration authorities as to whether they will issue a new DN visa. So the practice again will change over time. So it aligns, so the practice aligns with the legal framework.
So I think also it'd be fair to say that post COVID, or at least post Decree 16, when some of the different ministries or offices start going back, that you'll find that a lot of what's been discussed will start to align, and that basically the system will start moving. But I think the frustration at the moment is probably because you have this overlying issue of COVID-19 and people not being able to process or work from their offices, which is, in a country like Vietnam, which is driven by, a lot of it's driven by bureaucracy, has to happen that way. So, that people will be in offices and doing this face to face. I'm just aware of the time. There's still some Q&A as well. I have one from Wingtao Fan. Could you please share whether you have any official guidance or letter, say, that from a foreign employee you can use for an old work permit as proving their experience? I think really, Andrea, you spoke of that before, so that's been answered. But as I said, I'm aware of the time as we're coming up towards 11:30. Was there any closing comments from the discussion today, and also the general situation with the changes to labour laws that each of you'd like to address?
I think from my perspective, just picking up on that point there in respect to the work permit, I think the key, as Colin said, is that we now need Melissa to give guidance to the individual delisters on the application of Resolution 105, because the local authorities in the different provinces will still be interpreting it differently. And they will, and so what we want is effectively to get consistency effectively throughout Vietnam to make it much more straightforward. So I think key, Resolution 105 is a great step forward, but the key now is the guidance. The guidance needs to go out from Melissa to the individual departments of labour so that they can accept the work permit, the previous work permit as experience. They can accept a degree as a degree and not being relevant to the job, etc., etc. And also that they potentially, there's other issues around, will the work permit issued in Hanoi be acceptable as experience in Ho Chi Minh City, for example? All those type of things that will need to be resolved through guidance from Melissa over the next couple of months.
Thanks,
and in
Andrea.
respect, I guess in respect of entry, currently it's still challenging, and I think it will continue to be challenging, particularly in areas like Ho Chi Minh City, which are struggling with COVID at the moment. Until we get this under control in the different provinces, I think coming into is going to be challenging. Getting approval to come in.
Thanks, Andrea. Colin, Annie?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Andrea just said, I mean, the law cascades through many different levels. So you have laws, codes, decrees, decisions, implementation provisions, directives. It's a big chain of things. That kind of reminds me, as Bismarck said about the German reference, was there two things you don't want to watch being made: sausages and laws. So it's necessarily in every country a complex process, going through the whole thing of introducing new laws. That's not unique to Vietnam. So we do have to be patient here, and kind of, as I said, bear with them. And it will take more implementation provisions. It'll take a while for each Department of Labour to be confident with those, to be able to ask the ministry. So as with any law in any country, it can't happen overnight, but they are working very consistently towards it.
Great, thank you, Colin. Annie, any closing remark?
Yeah, I will just end on an optimistic note and say that it was quite a surprise on Saturday morning to wake up and see the new resolution, which, you know, solved a couple of headaches for me and my team immediately. So I think, you know, it's really important that groups of, you know, employers and chambers of commerce keep the conversation going with the Vietnamese government, and hopefully if we can continue to do that, then there might be further, you know, pleasant surprises over the coming months, and, you know, we can work towards making things smoother in other areas as well. So you know, I think 105 shows that, you know, there is reflection and there is progress and there is a willingness to amend things if there's a clear rationale for doing so. So let's be optimistic that, yeah, we can carry on the conversation and there will be further developments in this area. Thank you. Excellent. Thanks, Annie.
I think that the takeaway there is obviously we're working through Decree 152 with Resolution 105. 105 is a positive outcome for everyone. As we've spoken about, there has been the overlying factor of COVID-19 that we're experiencing at the moment. And much like most of the issues that we've been through over the past 18 months with COVID-19, we will work our way through this as well. It's just a matter of time, but it does offer a better landscape for the future, and obviously a more level playing field for those people that are wanting to come into Vietnam and work in Vietnam as well. So I'd like to thank Colin Blackwell, Andrea Godfrey and Annie Gale for your time this morning, and I'd like to thank the people who've joined us this morning for this discussion. Whilst it's been very informative, it's not exhausted. I'm sure that there's probably many questions that people might have beyond this, but beyond the discussion today, AusCham and also I'll work with BritCham as well to potentially share resources. I'd like to share some resources that people might wish to have, which would be along the lines of what the resolution says and what the decree says, and obviously some context of people within BritCham and AusCham that could field your questions or assist you from a professional perspective as well. So I'd like to thank everybody this morning, our speakers and our audience. And as I normally say in signing off, stay safe and stay strong. And I hope to see you in a face-to-face situation very soon. Thank you for your morning and goodbye.